I can't take a selfie and get it on the screen the same day, so I thought I'd look for a church that looks a lot like ours on Saturday morning. I'm wondering if you, when you look at that picture, what do you notice? A lot of empty seats. What else do you notice about the people? They're old, and they're in the back. You know, the thing, and it's something that's really weighed on me for the last few years, because my kids are that age, so it's what happens is, why do so many young people leave the church? And it's not just that they leave the church, because that's always been the thing. You know, as long as I can remember, as children grow up and they become adults able to make their own decisions, it's pretty typical for them to leave the church a bit, go off, find their way, but they find their way back. Typically, a lot of times when they have their own families, they come back because they want their children grounded, or they find that life doesn't really have any meaning for them, so they come back. But there's a trend. Let me go on with this before I jump ahead too much. Okay, I wanted to first give you a feel for how widespread this problem is. Do you think, I'm going to step back a minute, I'll get back to where I was. When you look at our church and you see the seats are empty and you see the people are old, do you think that is unique to our church? Do you think that's unique to Seventh-day Adventist? It's everywhere. Okay, Google and me are tied. Okay, I Google everything. So I'll go in and I Google, why are so many young believers leaving the church? How many hits do you think I found? How many? How many?
I'm not sure.
1,080,000 hits. That means that those words that are in my search there bar, how many people, why are people leaving the church? You can find 1 million articles that talk about that. This is a problem across the country, but kind of unique to the United States over a lot of others. The more civilized countries, the more first world countries, you see it worse than you do in third world countries. But 1 million hits, I couldn't believe it. It's a huge number. So it's hard when you see that much information. It's like, so what's good information, what's bad information? I've been looking at it for a long time, and I found that there are different reasons that people leave. And some of them we've seen a lot of in the past. They're traditional reasons that, and I'm going to ask you what you think they are, but there's some reasons that are much more depth to them, much more substantial criticisms of the church. I want to ask you, what do you think, if you talk to somebody who used to be a member and they've quit on the church, what do you think are the most common answers? Hurt feelings?
My family, my Asian member, this doesn't keep my attention, it doesn't hold my attention. I thought, sit there and listen, just try. Listen. It's not confusing enough. Yeah, it's not entertaining enough. And I'll never forget Stuart Sloan one time said that his little church in Pequot, I don't feel like your kids should have to be entertained to come to church. I used to say that to them all the time.
They don't appreciate that answer. Other reasons, what do you think? The most common. Haven't you heard before those people aren't friendly? People in that church aren't friendly, so I'm not going to go back. Or they're critical, judgmental. Let's look at some of the reasons. Okay. If you could say, some of this is, there's a little bit of humor here, but it's. I'm not going to make light of all of it, for sure. But you do hear this a lot. Church is boring. They're just not interested in what is being presented there. Some just want a break. And I've heard that one personally myself. I just want a break from it for a while. There's also this excuse that I was only going to please my parents anyway, or my sister, or my brother, or my spouse, or my uncle, or my aunt, or grandparents. I wasn't going for me. I was going because they wanted me to. And so when you get old enough, that's not reason enough to keep you there. That guy's kind of evil looking. I thought to myself, I should have got sweeter looking guy there. So ignore his face and look at all the fingers pointing at him. What kind of attitudes do we see in churches that make people feel like that? Judgmental is a big one. They say that they were unfriendly, unwelcoming, they seem judgmental or hypocritical, and they think that Christians think they have all the answers. I know we come across like that sometimes. They'll ask you a question, it's like, here's the answer, and this is the right answer, and I expect you to accept it, right? This is a generation that doesn't tolerate that very well. They want to hear what you think, but they want to think for themselves also. I'm not saying that any of these are real reasons to keep people out, but these are the kind of things that we hear that people eventually come back. It's like, I'm bored with church. Well, usually you're bored because you don't see the relevance of what's being presented to your life. As your life changes, it becomes very relevant. As you get older and life gets harder. So those kind of things don't really have the power to last and keep people away. There's also, read this, 30% of people who quit say religion is out of touch with science. And they want those to mesh up. Right? But historically, we found that where science thinks it disagrees with the Bible, that given enough time, it supports it. We've almost unanimously never found anything in science that can't be supported by the Bible in time, as it evolves and understanding evolves. So that even that reason doesn't hold for very long. And I think this is a big one. When the kids grow up, they get out of school, they have their careers, they have causes they're concerned about, and religion seems to be independent of that. It doesn't seem to be a factor in that part of their lives, so they lose interest in it at that point. And those are not really the things that I wanted to focus on today. It's this whole change of attitude about why people are quitting. And this is not just young people. You can find somebody who's been a worker in the church for 25 years, 30 years, and they get frustrated and they give up and they leave. We're talking about depth of reasons. We're talking about substantive reasons that people leave, and these are significant. One is, and you probably had experience with all of these at some point in your life. There are many former members who will say that the church is hostile to those who have doubts or questions. So let's say we're studying a topic in our Bible study, and somebody brings up a point that's inconsistent with what Adventists have typically believed. And instead of being constructive in our discussion regarding that issue, we become harsh, we become frustrated. It's like, you've heard this before, why are you bringing it up again? Why don't you get the answer I'm giving you? And we get hostile to that. We feel attacked, so we attack back. And so we make them feel like they can't have doubts or questions. Every one of us that's been second generation Adventist haven't come to a point where we've had doubts. We may have been raised in the church, but I was raised on the coattail of my mother's religion. And I accepted everything that she told me as fact. But there came a time, especially after she was gone, where that had to become mine. I had to go through those issues. I had to go through those studies. I had to sometimes raise those doubts. I had to go out for lunch on Sabbath. Okay? It was a simple thing growing up. You don't buy and sell on Sabbath, right? So I accepted that. But there came a time where I thought, it's harder for me to work at home than it is for me to go by. You know, I had to go through that. Now, if I had been met with ridicule by people in the churches, I was going through that, and they're thinking, what's wrong with you? You were raised a Seventh-day Adventist. Why are you in this restaurant on Sabbath? I would feel attacked. Right? We have to be tolerant of that because we don't know where people are in this process. We don't know that they're not going through this evaluation of an issue at that time. So we have to be supportive of that. And if we're not, that's the kind of reason people will leave and not come back. Okay? Because the church is not tolerant of that, and that's wrong. 30% of those who leave said that churches are afraid of the beliefs of other faiths. Afraid to address them, afraid to talk about them. And I think that, Katie's shaking her head back there, and it helps me to have a millennial in the crowd. I think you're just barely millennial, right, or Generation X?
I'm Generation X, I
Okay, so, but whatever that means, right, they tend to think the same ways. And so, I think the fact that we don't really address other beliefs thoroughly makes them feel like we exclude those, or makes it feel like we think those are wrong. And where it makes sense for us to understand what other people believe. I can remember, I keep referring to Mom because she was Mom, right? And she was very smart. And she had this era in her life where she studied other religions. You know, even after she was Seventh-day Adventist, she understood them. She studied them until she knew what they believed. And once you do that, that allows you to relate to people better, who share them, who hold those beliefs, than if you don't understand them. And so when people say, what's the difference between an Adventist and a Methodist? I have no idea, because I don't know what Methodists believe. So we can't be afraid of those things. We need to understand them. And so that's one of the things that this younger generation is not very tolerant of, because they are very much an all-inclusive group. They don't like when we exclude somebody because they have a different belief. They don't like when we exclude somebody because they're not a vegetarian. They don't like when we exclude somebody because they're gay. They don't tolerate that because they feel like everybody's a child of God, everybody should be accepted, and when we exclude them on the basis of our faith, that's a problem. Young adults, and that's the third bullet, young adults, they want common ground. They want us to welcome that person. It doesn't matter what they struggle with, because we all struggle, we all have our sins. So when we target a group, and we say we can't include this group because they're doing this thing. Let's say it's LGBT, and I know that may make some of you uncomfortable, but that's an easy target. That's one I have real experience with. When we target that, or when we sit in class and say, well, gay people are not going to be in heaven, the millennials will walk out because a gay person is no different than the person who lies and cheats and steals and everything else. So we can't be exclusive. We're Christians, we've got to love everybody. It doesn't matter what their background is, what their sin is, what their problem is. We have to accept that. We've got to love them. We can't exclude them. And our churches do. Churches all across the country do. Now that doesn't mean we're endorsing something that they may be doing that's wrong. That's not saying we make them the leadership in the church. No more than if I were a cheating spouse, you wouldn't have me teaching your kids, right? That's no different than any other thing, but you don't say that you're not going to be in heaven, right? We have to love everybody. We have to treat them equally, and when we don't, that is not a Christian spirit, and that is something that will turn that generation away. I don't know where it came from, and I know because I didn't teach it to my kids, but they are so offended when we target somebody and criticize that group, or say this group has this problem, or this group thinks this way. They're offended by that. They want to see everybody in that circle that's accepted. And we have a bit of a problem with that in our churches. These are all the kinds of things, when people leave for these reasons, they don't come back. Okay, this is not somebody was not nice to me, or somebody pointed at me, or somebody was critical of what I was wearing. It's not that kind of thing. This is the core of what a Christian is. And when we don't have those attributes, then we're not demonstrating Christ in our lives, right? And that turns people away. There's more. 25% of the people in this group, and now we're talking about people who leave and don't come back. They stay away and they never really come back to organized church. 25% of them say the Bible is not taught clearly or often enough. And I think that it's hard to say as a church where we are. I don't see Seventh-day Adventists as a group that doesn't teach Bible. I think you see Bible from the pulpit, you see it in the classrooms, you see the Bibles open and us reading them. But there are many religions where you don't see the Bible cracked open very often. And people are not studying for themselves. They are accepting what they hear somebody say. And that group, that young group of people are not satisfied with that. That's a good thing. That is a good thing. Then there is this second bullet where we say there's a large number of people who change their views. Okay, so what happened with me growing up and all of us second generation Adventists who had to make our doctrines our own? At some point we may say, I don't agree with what my mom thought. I don't agree with what Mary may have taught me as a child. Or Bill Wiles, well, that was my one. I would always go to Bill. Bill, why can't I play ball on Sabbath? And he would break it out. He would say, you know, here, he'd read from Isaiah and he'd give me all these reasons I couldn't. But there may become a point in time where I say, no, I disagree with the way they taught me that. I don't hold that view anymore. And so as those views become different, they will leave. I'm not saying that's wrong, because sometimes that's just what has to happen. The third bullet is one that kind of bothers me, because I think we all land there at times. 20% of the members who attended a church as a teenager said that God seems to be missing from my church experience. So we're talking about churches that are dead spiritually, where you can come in, you go through the motions, and you leave, and nothing's really different. You didn't gain anything, you didn't feel anything, you didn't really, and sometimes that's us. Sometimes we can't, and a lot of times that's us. We just come in and we're not ready to receive what's coming. But there are times when I may be ready to receive it, but it's just not there. There's something wrong. The church is dead. I can't find God in that church. Not because of me, but just because something's wrong at that church at that time. And I think that can happen to anybody. And I think we fall into that and we pull out of that, right? There's times where it's just, I can put Lonnie on the spot. It's like you sit there and you're talking as hard as you can, you preach as hard as you can, and it is not going in. People are not hearing it, they're not receiving it, they're not making it part of them. It's just the way the church moves, the way it grows, the way it evolves. At times, it's very hard to find God there. Now I'm telling you, this is what people are saying, right? Some I agree with, some maybe not so much. There are many that feel that they would be better off spiritually to leave the church altogether, because the church is the problem, not God. They want a relationship with God, they just can't maintain it in that church setting, the way that church is spiritually, the way it's run, the way it's taught, the way the people behave, the way they accept others. I can't find God there. I'm better off out of it than in it. Well, that's a sad testimony. And I don't think they gave a percentage there. It was a very large number of people who said that that was the case. I will have a better relationship with God if I get out of that church than if I stay in it. They feel like they have stayed in the church long past the point that it was fulfilling or even sustaining. This grouping of people in one particular study was called church refugees. Because a refugee is somebody that's kind of forced out of their country. They love their country, they don't want to leave it, but they have to survive, right? So he calls them church refugees, or he calls them the de-churched or the dones. They're done with it. They have stayed in it, and they can't seem to make anything happen. They can't drive anything new. They can't reach out to other people because of the bureaucracy that's in the church. I can't start a ministry unless I can get approval by this, and this group. And when we do that, we shut people down. And it causes them to get to this point, I'm done with it. I can go out, and in fact, a lady I work with has been going through the problem. I think she's Church of God in La Follette. And she loves food ministry. But they have made it so difficult for her to do that. She's going to do it on her own. She's going to separate herself from the church's program so she can do her own food ministry. There's something wrong when you have to do that. The dones don't want to leave, but they feel it's dangerous spiritually to leave. They tell stories of frustration, humiliation, judgment, and embarrassment and fear, causing them to leave the church. They remarked that they worked diligently for reform within the church, but felt the church was exclusively focused on, I've mentioned this so many times, the church is focused on its own survival, its resistance to change, and is not focused on people on the outside, but on maintaining itself from the inside. I think that we can all fall into that too. Churches can become like that, and then they can move away from that. It's very easy to stay focused on ourselves. What's our budget? What's the condition of our building? What are the programs we need for ourselves? I don't like this study. This is not helping me. So it's all about taking care of me, not reaching out to others. And so we get that focus, and that pushes away young adults. They are looking more for that outreach, that ability to connect with people who are outside the church, and they feel like the church is not doing that. Now, you got to remember, this is across the board. This is not denomination specific. This is a study that was done by a sociologist. It's not even religious specific or denomination specific. So these things may or may not have relevance to us, but I can tell you one thing it does have relevance to is young people and the way they think. And I think that it hits on those. The Duns are people who have made an explicit and an intentional decision to leave organized religion. I've heard that said to me, I'm over organized religion. And that is disturbing when you have somebody say that to you, and it's somebody that you love and you want them to be okay. And for me, church is my lifeline. There's times when I know it may not be perfect, but I hang on to it with everything I've got because that's what I've got. And so I feel like if I turn loose of it, even if it's flawed, if I turn loose of it, I don't have anything to keep me grounded. And so I think my child's not going to have that. Or my spouse is not going to have that. Or my loved one's not going to have that thing to hang on to if they turn their back on organized religion. So what do we do? What do we do knowing this? And we want to grow our churches in a way that appeals to the millennials. Right? We want a church that draws them in, not pushes them out. So let's look at this. Can we be the church that the Duns are looking for without losing our purpose as it's described in the Bible? I knew I'd sweat. This is hard work. You're saying stuff and you're like, oh my goodness, I shouldn't have said that. It makes you sweat. I'm sorry.
Do you want water?
That'd be great. Thank you. Can we be the church that the Duns are looking for without losing our purpose? Without losing what the Bible says is our purpose as a church. So what is the purpose of the church?
Jesus is going to say.
You better have something to hang on to, because that's really close. I feel like it's really close. The verses that Kyle read in Acts is, if you had a mission statement for the church, this could be it. This would be a description. So this is in Acts. This is like when the first churches were established. This is what they did. Okay? They devoted themselves to the apostles, to teaching, to fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. Okay, those were the primary things that they did in the first churches. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together, and they had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and they ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God, enjoying the favor of all the people, and the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. So if you look at that as what our churches are supposed to be doing, there's another verse that talks about basically where God's hands, feet, mouth on the earth. What would He do if He was here? That's what our church should be doing. Okay, those things that He did, those things that He would do if He was here. And so my thought is, are those things consistent with what these younger believers are looking for? Can we merge those? Can we mesh those? Can we become that church and still meet the intent of what the church is supposed to do? So let's look at this for just a little bit. The church is to teach biblical doctrine so that we can do what? Overcome sin. We understand sin for what it is. We've got to overcome it. To be grounded in our faith. To remain free from the pollutions of the earth. The church in its teaching helps us to see the world for what it is. Helps us to learn to avoid that, right? So the teaching part is critical. That's the main thing. When I read about or hear about Jesus went into the temple, they stood up for to read, right? They stood up and they read the scriptures. It was a learning experience. Ephesians talks about teaching for this purpose, and I think this is so critical when, like Mary Ann just said, Jesus is coming soon. So, and it tells us we're supposed to not forsake assembling ourselves together in those last days for this reason. Then we will no longer be infants tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching, and by the cunning and craftiness of men in their deceitful scheming. What we're saying here is that it's like you can hear a doctrine or somebody talking about a fundamental belief of the Bible, and there will be enough truth in it that even if you are well studied, it's hard to know if it's completely true, if you're not grounded, if you haven't studied it. And not only can it be misleading by people making mistakes, it's on purpose. There will be people who will masterfully take a truth and divert it and change it enough, knowing that by doing that, you can be drawn in. So the teaching purpose is critical for the church. Now, if you think about it, what are the millennials saying? The Bible's not taught clearly and it's not taught often enough. That's fair. Well, that's what we're saying, right? We need to be teaching Bible in our churches. Hostile to doubters? How can you be hostile to a doubter as you're trying to figure out what I believe and why I believe it? Doubt is a healthy thing as long as you are expressing it and if you're sincere. Now, I'm going to throw that out there. There are people who will take apart a study or a discussion because they intentionally want to disprove it. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people with sincere questions who are looking for sincere answers. That is the kind of thing we have to welcome. We have to encourage those questions so that we can go through it so that that person can become grounded themselves. Does that make sense? I'm not talking about somebody who's intentionally taking it apart. That's a different problem altogether. A commission given to the church, this is in Matthew. The church is called to be faithful in sharing the gospel through word and deed. It's to be a lighthouse in the community. It is to both promote the gospel and prepare its members to proclaim the gospel. And that's a part of teaching. To be able to share the gospel, we have to know it. We have to understand it. So that's another reason that teaching is critical. When the millennials say the church is too focused on itself, if we're promoting, if we're teaching us and encouraging us to go out and share, then we're not focused on ourselves, right? We're focused on others. You can find God in a church that is focused on the gospel and is trying to draw others in. So I think that that's consistent. Church is to be a place of fellowship where Christians can be devoted to one another, honor one another, instruct one another, be kind and compassionate, encourage and love. Those are kind of things that we're told if you're a part of a church, you can count on these things, right? That's what our fellow believers do. Even if they're flawed and defective and maybe a little judgmental, they still can do these things, right? We're not perfect beings, we're Christians, we're striving to be, but in doing that, we encourage each other, right? We teach each other. Churches that are like this are not hostile to doubters. They are not exclusive. We don't shut people out because they don't behave exactly the way we behave. Maybe somebody, well, I won't go there because I'll be offensive. We can't exclude anybody regardless of what their sin is. I can't pick somebody's sin and say, you can't come because you do this, because I've got my own. How can we do that? How can we pick one thing that somebody's doing and say, you're not welcome? God sees all sins the same. I don't want to see mine hanging there in the balance with that person that I'm shutting out. We have to stop doing that. And I don't care what their sin is. It doesn't matter what it is. It's not our business what it is. Right? We have to welcome them. And if we're doing these things, If a church is doing and has these characteristics, we're going to be fine. We won't be focused on ourselves. We'll be inclusive of everybody. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: look after orphans and widows. Keep oneself from being polluted by the world. Minister to those in need. Historically, we have had a community services program. So we can sit in a pew, throw our shoulders back and say, we reach out to others. Reaching out to others is not just passing a few dollars onto that program and relying on one or two people to take care of it. That's all of us being involved. That's all of us finding a way to minister to people who need help. This is not a check the box, I'm doing my part by giving money to this program, or I'm in a church that has this program. This is us, as individuals, seeing people who have needs and answering those. And when we don't do that, that's a problem, because we become more focused on ourselves and not so focused on those outside the church that are in need. And that's one of the criticisms that the churches get. The church is to be a place where believers can observe the Lord's Supper, remembering Christ's death and shed blood on our behalf. Okay, I'm going to go all out here and probably get uninvited to ever talk again. Our last communion service, we had, 12 people here. And I'm the world's worst. It's like, oh man, it's communion. That's an ordeal to, when you're not comfortable doing that. There's a lot of us who aren't, and we say, yeah, it's communion, and we do it too often. We only need to do this once a year, maybe once in our whole lives, right? They did it on a regular basis. After Jesus was crucified and resurrected, that was a regular part of their coming together in their meetings, was the breaking of bread. When we say that God is not in this church, God's in a church that has communion, that has foot washing, that has the grape juice and the bread. I mean, you can't not see God when you're doing that. I mean, if you're doing it with your heart in it. You can sit there and go through the motions. But yeah, we may not be comfortable with that. It may seem awkward to us, but that is to be a regular part of the church. And why? What is the reason for incorporating communion as part of the church? What?
Remembrance.
It's not the act of what you're doing, it's the purpose of it. It's why. It's remembering that sacrifice that was made.
It's right there on our table.
Yeah, how often do we read that? I don't even see it anymore. So that's one of the purposes, is the remembrance. But also the concept of breaking bread was not just communion, it was they actually kind of lived together. They were together every day, they ate meals together, they had a common purpose at that time. So breaking bread together was both aspects of that. So I think as we move closer to the last days, we will see ourselves more, doing that more. Right now we don't really feel as much need for each other, but I think we will. As we get closer and persecutions begin, we're going to feel a need to be together, and we will be drawn closer. And that's a part of the purpose of the church. The final purpose is prayer, and as mentioned in Acts 2:42. The church is to be a place that promotes prayer, teaches prayer, and practices prayer. Okay, so we pray a lot at church. Actually, I made a note the other day. I was counting what all we do, because sometimes we have an hour of preliminaries before we get to the sermon. And so I thought, I'm going to break this down. I want to see what all we do in there, and how much time we spend. We have a minute for this. We have 5 minutes for this. We pray. If I get my bulletin down 4 times before the sermon started. That's good. So does that mean that we're where we need to be in prayer?
Pray constantly.
What, Joe?
Pray constantly.
And when we pray, there are degrees of connection with God. I can pray and not feel anything. I go through the mechanics of it. I say the words I say every day. Or, especially when you're praying out loud in front of people, it makes you a little uncomfortable, so you fall into using the terms you always use. I'm talking about heartfelt prayer. I try to picture to myself Jesus in the sanctuary, passing my prayers on, and I try to think what he's hearing from me. I try to visualize that and say, Lord, I know you have to be so sick of me and the kind of things I say in my prayers and the kind of things I ask for. We're talking about prayer that moves beyond that. We're talking about prayer that gets to the heart of why our pews are empty. The things that gets to the heart of why we are shut down Christians, why we're so lukewarm. I'm talking about prayers that where we get to the point where it pulls the tears out of you, it pulls the anguish out of you because you feel that so strongly. That's the kind of prayer we're talking about. And when you pray like that, you don't have to worry, I can't find God in that church. God's going to be in that church. He's just waiting for us to ask with that kind of passion, with that kind of connection. And we tend to do it without it. We tend to say the words, just say the words. We got through it. I didn't say anything stupid. I don't have to be embarrassed, right? When you have to pray out loud, it's really like that, isn't it? It's like, man, that didn't make a lick of sense when you're done. We have to get past that to get the kind of prayer we're talking about. Okay, so no wonder I sweat all out. I just dabble all over stuff I shouldn't say. What do I want to think about right now?
I always like to hear Brent pray because it's like he's talking.
Yeah, you don't
Having
get
a
that
one-on-one
big.
conversation with the Lord.
I think it's a gift to be able to pray like that in front of people because we tend to get so nervous.
I know when I'm up there, I call him Jeanette while I pray because I love to hear Jeanette.
Yeah, we're at all different places with that. Okay, I want you guys to think about this for a minute. What we've talked about is all over the map. I mean, that was not a fingers pointed at COVID, okay? And it was not fingers pointed at Adventists. This was a general study done across the country. But I want you to think about, is the Coalfield Seventh-day Adventist Church, you don't have to say this out loud, are we unwelcoming? Are we unaccepting? Are we not inclusive? Do we make people feel like they are unwelcome here if they come in dressed in a strange way, or if they happen to be a person who has a problem with alcohol or tobacco or bigger issues? Do we make them feel uncomfortable
I hope not.
when they come here? I hope not. Are we hostile to doubters? When people raise a question that disagrees with what we believe and what we have known and what we believe we've said to that person many, many times, are we hostile to that? I know personally I get like that sometimes. It's like, we've already had this discussion. I thought you got it. But they keep bringing the issue up. It's like, if they bring the issue up, they still got a question. We can't shut that down. Of course, unless they're just trying to take it apart. That's a different thing. We need to understand what other people believe. For our own sakes, for our ability to relate to them, we need to understand what they believe. Don't shy away from that. It's hard to understand what we believe ourselves, but when you get into other people's, it's a big ball of wax. Do we teach the Bible frequently and clearly? Do we sugarcoat things? We've been talking about that a lot in our class, in our Bible study. We've had a tendency, many of us in the past, to try to sugarcoat things. If we're going to talk about an issue that we think State of the Dead is an easy one to talk about, is that people are so fragile. I don't want to talk about State of the Dead to them at that point in time. Or Sabbath keeping. It's like, they'll say to me, people used to say to me, I don't think it really matters what day you keep. And I have been guilty of saying, you're probably right. I have said that to people. I wish I could find everyone I ever said that to and could go back to them and say, I'm sorry, I disagree. We have to say clearly, forcefully, not down your throat, but clearly speak what the Bible says. We have to teach it. That's what we're here for. And when we sugarcoat it, we are doing a disservice to ourselves and certainly to that person we're talking to.
Like we're ashamed of it, we're not.
Yeah, you don't want to point out that difference. You don't want to make them uncomfortable. I don't want to make you feel bad. But I can still remember my Aunt Margie one time. We were sitting there in a group of us, I know Patty remembers it, we talked about it. And I think it was a Sabbath discussion, wasn't it, Pat? I think so. And they made that statement, Margie, just kind as she could be, that low key way she had to speak, and said, that's not true. And every one of us immediately looked at their feet because we were embarrassed for the person she was talking to, because she was basically saying, you're wrong. In a kind way, you're wrong. And I thought, Margie, why are you doing that? And now it's like, Teresa, why didn't you do that? We have to be able to do that. It's important. It's critical. Is our church dead? Can you find God here? I know a lot of that's based on the individual, but a lot of it's not. There are places where the church is dead and it's contagious. I'm telling you, if you sit in the middle of a bunch of dead Christians, it rubs off on you. And if you're sitting in the middle of a bunch of Christians who are dead and you are not, that rubs off too. Have you ever sat in a crowd of people and somebody will say something or a song come on and they'll raise their hand to God? And I think, oh, I'd like to do that. But I can't. I can't do it. And it's like my arm won't go up because I'm so self-conscious and awkward. But I feel it, but I shut it down because I don't want to call attention to myself and make myself look stupid, right? But when they raise their hand beside me, it's contagious. It's like, I feel that too. I want to raise my hand. We're hurting ourselves when we don't do that, when we don't recognize God. When I feel like saying amen and I don't, I shouldn't do that. Sometimes I don't because I know what Patty's going to look, what's wrong with you? Or why? She'll make me feel so stupid sometimes. It's like, why are you wearing a dress there? Or why, that kind of thing. And she'll do that. It's like, call attention to yourself. But there's times I really want to say loudly, amen, but I'm afraid to. But when we do that, everybody around you feels that too. And it's contagious. So we shut each other down to the point where it's like, man, that's the deadest church I've ever been in my life.
Can I say that?
Sure.
Talk about that, raising your hands. When I see somebody do it, it makes you want to cry. And I see somebody do it. Well, every time we're at the Fifth Sunday night singing or somewhere and somebody gets emotional, Jeanette will raise her hand.
Yeah.
But she won't do it here. That's not.
That's exactly why we rub off on each other. Yeah.
But she will do it there. I think about her. She will do it there. That little hand will go up. She won't do it here.
But Robert used to do it. It always touched me because I knew if Robert raised his hand, he felt something. It's like, man, I think I feel it too. No, shut your hand down, put down your lap, I don't want people to look at me.
Mama did in later years.
Did she? Well, there's nothing wrong with that, folks. I'm telling you, we need
She finally
to.
decided, I don't care what anybody thinks.
That takes a while to get there, doesn't it?
It should be just a natural thing for us. Why worry about everybody's little thing?
Well, we're the Adventists. What did they always say when I was young? It's like, Adventists don't even say amen, they nod. If you say something that you agree with, nod your head. You know what? You nodded too, haven't you? Just saying amen? Exactly. We need to show it. If we feel it, we need to show it.
Well, Lonnie will say something, we don't say anything, he'll say,
Yeah, it's like, I don't hear you. It's like, and so it's like I nod harder. You hear that, Lonnie? I'm nodding hard. I agree with you, but I can't say it. I didn't raise my hand. We need to show when we feel God. We need to show it.
Hey, Teresa, in a lot of our Adventist black churches and our Adventist Hispanic churches and Romanian, I've only been in a couple of those, they do that. They show that passion too.
It's a learned thing, and it's from the time I was raised, you could hear a pin drop in their churches, and you never heard very much amen, never saw a hand raised, ever. And so I've learned that, and now it's really hard to not do that. We're going to do it as a group one time. We're going to all do it. We're going to say, okay, you feel it, raise it. I'm going to stand here until you raise your hand. I know you feel it, raise it. I think we're going to have to go through something like that to the point where we can show what we feel. The church
I love it when Eve Soot comes to sing.
Yeah.
She's so passionate, when she sings, and she just makes you feel, she's a sweet person, but she makes you feel good.
Yeah.
If she's up there.
Well, that's what I'm saying, it's contagious, so Are we too resistant to change? And I think that's a hard one, because they're sometimes looking for something different, but we're so comfortable with what we are, how we structure their programs, the way we present, the way we have our ministers go in the back room and come out and say, "You know how long we've been doing that?" As long as I can remember. From the time I was tiny, that was the deal. That's how we did it. We take the offering in the same way. We do, everything is exactly the same, and we're afraid to change it. We're resistant to that. And when there's people who are looking for a change, and you can never make it happen, they get frustrated. It's like, okay, we have, I mentioned earlier, sometimes an hour of preliminaries before we get to the sermon, so Lonnie gets maybe 20 minutes to speak. And we spend a whole lot of time doing things can we do that a different way? So that we have more time for what we actually came for.
Put duct tape on Pam's mouth.
Oh, buddy. This is my place to vent.
Therapy group.
Yeah, this is my therapy.
I think we have to be open to change within reason. It can't be, we don't want to be crazy, right? All right, we're almost done here.
I think there's too much change in the church toward the world.
When I talk about change, I'm not talking about changing what we believe. That doesn't change. In fact, Joe sent me something this week on Facebook where it talked, or email, where it talked about how the churches are kind of thinking they have to become more worldwide to draw people in. No, we don't. We don't veer off of what we believe. And we know that when we get new light, it only builds on the light we had. It doesn't change. Those fundamentals never change. I'm talking more about the structure of the service. Do we have to have a song here? Do we have to have a prayer there? Do we have to stand for this or sit for this? We do all these things that are the formality of a program that have nothing to do with what we came for, which was the preaching of the word, which does not change. Right? So I know that there are people who are back issues. I see Joe a lot of times walking around back there because his back hurts. He can't sit that long. I know other people. So can we change it? Not the beliefs, but the structure. And I think we have to be open to that. So you look at it, we have flawed churches. I don't need to go to a flawed church to be saved. I don't have to go to a great church to be saved, right? I hear that a lot. I have to go to church. My brother, all the time, I have to go to church to be saved. So I think I'll quit. Jesus never quit. Okay, as long as he was on earth, he went to the temple to worship on Sabbath. That was his custom, which meant he did it all the time. If he did it, we need to do it. Right? Quitting is not an option. I don't need to surround myself with defective Christians in a flawed church. I'm going to quit. Sometimes we're looking for a reason to quit. It's easy to find, right? Hebrews, well, that's long. Let us not give up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but let us encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. As we approach the last days, we need the church more than ever. But here's the thing, it's like if the church is so flawed, if it's so, got so many things wrong that pushes people out the door, is that where I need to be? Okay, I love this quote from Ellen White. We'll finish with this. We should remember that the church, enfeebled and defective though it is the only object on earth on which Christ bestows his supreme regard. He is constantly watching it with solicitude, which means love and caring, and is strengthening it by his Holy Spirit. She said right up front, the church is flawed, it's defective, it's full of people who are sinful and who are learning, who are becoming more Christ-like. So of course the church is going to be flawed, but it's still the only object, only organization that Jesus Christ, that God has, what does she say, affection for, supreme regard. He sees it as the one thing. It's not a person, it's an organization or a set of believers that is striving to become closer to him. Of course he loves it. He has regard for it. He probably has pity on us as we try to continue to grow it and evolve it. So here's our challenge. Be the change you want to see. If you feel like lifting your hand, lift your hand. If you feel like saying amen loudly, say amen loudly. If you feel like hugging somebody, hug somebody. Show what you feel. Be the change you want to see, and it'll grow around us. Drive the change you want to see. Encourage other people to do the same things. And here's the big one. Can we become the church that God intended us to be? And also be the church that draws people to it, not pushes them out? I think we can. I think we just have to be attuned to that. We have to pray for that. That has to be a goal. We have to let God lead us in that. We have to be willing to go down the path He takes us. Okay, so let's bow our heads for prayer. Father in heaven, we thank you for the gift of the church. We know, Lord, that it sometimes takes incredible amounts of time and energy as we try to figure out what it's supposed to be, how it's supposed to function. And Lord, we want more than anything for it to meet the needs that you had for the church when you first established it. We pray, Lord, that we can be the church that people are drawn to, not run away from. That we can reach you here, that we feel you here. That every person comes here, it feels like they were closer to you because they were here. We want this more than anything, God, for this church, for ourselves, for those that we love. Pray, Lord, that you send the Holy Spirit with us through the rest of the Sabbath service, through the rest of this day. Bring us back together to study and worship again. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.